I began last week talking about the challenges of living in the secular age. The first challenge was busyness. It's a busy world we're living in. And with that, the eroding of our hope in a God who acts. Now, the solution to this busyness, as proposed to by the authors of When Church Stops Working, is to learn how to wait for God. And today I'd like to reflect a little further on this busyness that we feel, especially at this time of year. Because not only are we busy with all sorts of Christmas activities, to-do lists, and events, but the busyness and that need to keep up with an ever-accelerating world causes us to always be looking ahead to the next thing rather than enjoying the moment that we are in. We're always living in the future instead of living in the present. I said last week that Advent is countercultural, and that's because it invites us, rather than living in the future, to live and find meaning in the waiting for Christmas, at a time when so much of our attention is focused on Christmas Day itself. I mean, many of us, in one way or another, are already there in our minds, right? Figuring out, okay, what's for dinner? Who's going to be there? What gifts need to be purchased and wrapped? I'm sure you're thinking about that right now. Asking questions like, will there be enough food? Will so-and-so like their present? How are we going to handle those awkward family dynamics this year? For me, the future questions are always like, what hymns are we going to do for Christmas Eve? And what am I going to say on that special evening? The problem with all that is that when the day finally arrives, we can barely enjoy it because we are already on to the next thing. Okay, what are we doing for New Year's? How about that Boxing Day sale we got to go to? Oh, I'm going back to work and have to deal with all those emails I've not answered. In a secular world, the busyness never stops. There is always something else. The future is always calling us away from the present, and peace is so elusive in that. And so, as the book puts it, secular logic tells us that there are two speeds: fast or dead. There is no in-between. There is no peace. And the church is not immune to any of these elements of the secular age. We're always thinking about the future too. Many congregations are worried about their future as they see dwindling numbers, fatiguing leadership, church closures. At the last presbytery meeting of the Waterloo-Wellington Presbytery, we were discussing what has been dubbed a crisis, the fact that half of the churches in the presbytery are without a minister right now. So what's our solution? Well, we're going to have a talk about the future. What's going to happen? And it's really hard not to live into that future and to worry about what's coming next, whether that's to do with our careers, our families, our health, or just what's going on in the world in general. But there is a danger to always living in the future. And I'll quote the book again. When we disconnect from what's right in front of us, we end up alienated from ourselves, from the life we're living right now. Disconnecting from the person in front of us harms them because we treat them like an object, and it hurts us too. The secular rush can lead us to stop feeling alive because we can no longer just be. We can no longer just remember and embrace that we are alive, receiving life as a gift. In other words, to sum that up, when we live in the future, we forget about the people with us in the present. And we see that all the time in all aspects of life. You see it in the church when volunteers, staff, and pastors get burnt out because of the never-ending treadmill that we call ministry. You see this in families when relationships break down because people are so busy making sure that their family has enough, they forget that their presence is the greatest gift that they can give to one another. You see this in workplaces where employees are treated like cogs in a machine, just there to make money, instead of being human beings with feelings and hopes. And when we disconnect from the present moment and the people around us, unbeknownst to us, we are simultaneously disconnecting from God. As I was listening to Keys speak this morning, one thing stood out quite clearly for me, which is that when it came to hearing God's call in his life, so much of that had to do with the people around him that connected him to that call. First, it was his minister, Frank, who inspired him to be a minister. Then it was Darlene on several occasions who confirmed his call, who encouraged him to keep going when he was looking for a way out. It was his session. It was his co-workers and employers, all of them confirming God's call to him. And then at the end, his son cheering for him as he crossed the stage. That is God saying, through his son, I've called you. Just like Samuel, Keith mentioned in the Bible, who only recognized God's calling, he only recognized after talking with Eli, the priest, who was in there. He kept going to Eli, thinking Eli was the one calling him. And then finally, Eli's like, no. Next time you hear that voice calling you, say, your servant is listening. The church believes that we can hear God's voice most clearly when we stand within the community of faith. God's not somewhere out there in the future. God is here now, in the faces of all of us gathered here, week after week. Consider what Mary did. The first thing that she did when she heard that she's going to give birth to the Son of God, she heard a message from God. And what does she do? She goes to see her cousin, to be with her people. And Elizabeth confirms all the things that Mary was told. And the two of them there, pregnant with miracles from God, they wait together for what God is about to do. You know, talking about waiting, it isn't much fun to do alone. In some cases, waiting, like in waiting for death, waiting alone can be crushing. But when there is someone to wait with you, someone to hold your hand, someone to share that burden of waiting, all of a sudden, waiting is filled with meaning and peace. Even in the busyness of our secular age, if we can find time to wait and connect with the people around us, even then, in the busyness, we can find that peace we are looking for, moments of resonance that give our lives meaning and purpose. I had just such a moment this week. Last Sunday was a busy day. Okay, we had church in the morning, have to get here early. There was things after church, and then we had to go home for a quick lunch and then get to curling, and then we had to come home and go to Grandma and Grandpa's for dinner, and then it was carols and choirs concert. So we had to head out in the cold rain for that concert. And, you know, I could have just stayed home instead of going to the choir thing that night. Or I could have, in between the carols and the choir singing, just think of the even busier week that was ahead of me. But then I felt Daniel snuggle in beside me. And then I felt Ben's head rest on my shoulder. And I knew that I was there where I needed to be at that moment with those people in the present, waiting with my family. This is the advice given in the book for a church that waits. A waiting church is waiting for God, waiting for the Spirit to move, waiting to connect with God. As we wait for God's action, we open ourselves to God's arriving by ministering to one another. We do this by concerning ourselves with the present, which is the only place where we live out our connections. We live with others in the present, not the future. Tending to connections and relationships is how we live faithfully in the present, in the right now. This is what a waiting church does. It attends directly and passionately to this moment with these people. So maybe that means putting down your phone so you can attend to those around you. Maybe it means picking up the phone and attending to those who you haven't talked to in a long time. Maybe it means sitting down on one of those benches in the shopping mall and just taking a breath. Or maybe it means lingering a little longer around the dinner table with family and friends before you go on to the next thing. Our lives are busy, but we can find moments of peace as long as we learn to wait and attend to the people that God has given us to love and serve. And so my hope for you this Advent season is that as you wait with hope for a God who acts, and God would bless you with others to wait with you, so that together you may find that elusive peace that comes with living in this moment with these people. Amen.